Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for what's right could cost you everything? On a frosty Friday night in the heart of a bustling city, 27-year-old Clara Bennett, a waitress at the Starlight Diner, found herself at that very crossroads. Clara had left her stable office job 6 months ago to work the graveyard shift at this 24/7 eatery, pouring every ounce of her strength into caring for her 20-year-old brother, Ethan, who was fighting leukemia. Every crumpled tip she stuffed into her apron went toward his mounting medical bills, leaving her exhausted but resolute. The diner's neon sign cast a warm glow over the snow-dusted street, its hum a comforting constant amidst her storm of worries. But tonight, as the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, Clara's kindness would be tested in a way that would change her life forever. What would you do if you saw someone being humiliated in front of a crowd? Would you step in, risking everything to defend their dignity, or would you stay silent, hoping someone else would act? Share your choice in the comments below as option 1 or option 2. For more heart-stirring tales like Clara's, hit that like button and subscribe to daily narrated stories, where every story inspires courage and reminds us of the power of compassion. Clara had been on her feet for 12 grueling hours, her apron stained with coffee splashes, but her warm smile never faltered, a beacon that drew customers in despite her exhaustion. "Clara, table 5 needs a refill," called out Margaret, the diner's veteran waitress, her voice cutting through the hum of chatter and the clatter of plates. Clara nodded, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face, her hazel eyes reflecting the neon glow outside. The place was packed, the laughter of families mixing with the occasional jingle of the door as new patrons braved the cold. Among them was an elderly man, his faded military jacket fraying at the seams, his boots worn thin, and a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His name was Henry, though Clara didn't know that yet. What struck her most was his eyes, deep pools of resilience, shadowed by an exhaustion that spoke of battles fought long ago. He shuffled to the farthest corner booth, avoiding the curious stares of other diners, his presence almost ghostly in the lively atmosphere. Clara's heart clenched as she watched him settle into the booth, his movements slow and deliberate. She recognized that look, the same weary dignity her father, a retired army medic, had carried after years of service, a quiet pride that society often overlooked. "What can I get for you, sir?" she asked, her voice soft as she approached Henry's table, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum floor. He fumbled in his pocket, producing a handful of crumpled bills and coins, barely enough for a cup of coffee. "Just a coffee, please, miss," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "And maybe some water?" Clara smiled warmly, her hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm Clara. Our coffee comes with free biscuits, on the house." Henry's eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through his stoic facade. "Thank you, Clara. I'm Henry," he murmured, wrapping his weathered hands around the steaming mug she brought him, the warmth seeping into his calloused fingers. Moments later, the diner's door swung open again, letting in a gust of icy air that sent napkins fluttering off tables. 3 rowdy teenagers swaggered in, dressed in designer jackets and sneakers that cost more than Clara's monthly rent. Their laughter was loud and grating, a stark contrast to the cozy atmosphere. The diner's manager, Victor, perked up at the sight of them. Wealthy kids meant big tips, and he was always eager to please. But their attention quickly zeroed in on Henry, their expressions twisting into sneers. "Ew, what's that smell? Smells like failure." One of them jeered, pinching his nose as his friends cackled, their voices echoing off the diner's walls. Clara's stomach twisted, her grip tightening on the coffee pot as she set it down in front of Henry, instinctively stepping between him and the boys to shield him from their cruelty. "Look at this guy. What's a filthy old man like you doing here?" "This isn't a charity," the second teen sneered, his voice slicing through the warm hum of the diner like a shard of glass. Henry's shoulders slumped further, his weathered hands trembling around the chipped ceramic mug as he stared down at the scratched tabletop, avoiding their mocking gazes. The third boy, Dylan, the apparent leader, with a smirk that reeked of entitlement, sauntered over, his designer sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. The son of a powerful local real estate tycoon, Dylan carried an air of untouchability. With a dramatic flick of his wrist, he tossed a handful of coins onto Henry's table, the metallic clinks echoing as they scattered and rolled onto the floor. "Here, old man, buy yourself some dignity," Dylan taunted, his friends erupting into shrill laughter that grated on Clara's nerves. Clara's blood surged, a fiery heat rising in her chest. Her hazel eyes darted around the diner, searching for an ally. The clatter of forks and the hum of conversation had fallen silent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Her co-workers, Margaret included, averted their gazes, pretending to wipe down counters or refill sugar jars. Victor busied himself at the register, his back turned as if the scene unfolding wasn't his problem. The other customers shifted uncomfortably in their vinyl booths, some casting annoyed glances at the disruption, but no one spoke up. Henry's eyes glistened with shame, the lines on his face deepening as he hunched further into himself, his silence a louder cry than any protest could have been. Clara's mind raced, her heart pounding in her ears. She could still hear her father's voice, a memory from a rainy evening years ago when she was just a girl. He'd come home from the VA hospital, his medic's uniform still carrying the faint scent of antiseptic, and sat her down at their small kitchen table. "Clara," he'd said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his experiences, "the world can be cruel to those who've given everything. I saw it today, a soldier, broken by war, ignored by the very people he fought for. Kindness is a choice, sweetheart. Sometimes it's the hardest choice, but it's always the right one." That memory anchored her now, grounding her amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Her hands trembled as she set the coffee pot down on Henry's table, the glass clinking softly against the wood. She couldn't stay silent, not when Henry's dignity was being trampled. Without a second thought, Clara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the teenager's laughter like a blade forged in resolve. "That's enough." Her tone was firm, unwavering, as she planted herself in front of Dylan, who towered over her by nearly a foot. Her apron, stained with coffee splashes, seemed to glow under the diner's fluorescent lights, a badge of her labor and her defiance. "You boys need to leave. Now." The diner fell deathly silent, the air thick with tension as all eyes turned to the confrontation unfolding in the corner booth. Dylan blinked, caught off guard by the waitress's audacity. His smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, crossing his arms over his chest. "Are you kidding me? Do you even know who my father is?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance. Clara's gaze didn't waver, her hazel eyes blazing with a quiet fury. "I don't care if your father owns the whole city. In this diner, everyone deserves respect." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that seemed to echo off the diner's walls, each syllable a testament to her resolve. She could feel the weight of every stare in the room, the unspoken question lingering. Would she back down? Dylan's smirk returned, but it was colder now, more calculating. "Fine, if you're so righteous, why don't you pay for his meal? I bet he can't even afford a burger," he sneered, his friend snickering behind him. Henry looked up, his voice barely a whisper, rough and cracked from disuse. "Please, miss, don't trouble yourself. I'll leave." His words broke Clara's heart, the resignation in his tone a stark reminder of the countless times he'd likely been forced to walk away, to shrink himself to avoid conflict. But Clara was already reaching into her apron, her fingers brushing against the worn leather wallet she'd carried since high school, a gift from her father, its stitching frayed but its contents precious. Inside were the tips she'd saved for Ethan's next round of chemo, every crumpled bill a lifeline for her brother's survival. Her hands shook as she pulled out a $20 bill, the paper crinkling in her grip. She slapped it onto the table with a defiance that belied the fear gnawing at her insides. "His meal is on me. He can order whatever he wants," she said, her eyes locked on Dylan's, daring him to push her further. "Now get out before I call the police." The diner held its breath, the silence so profound that Clara could hear the faint hum of the neon sign outside. Dylan's friends tugged at his sleeve, their bravado fading as they sensed the situation spiraling beyond their control. "You'll regret this," Dylan spat, his voice dripping with venom. "My family practically runs this town. My father could have this place shut down by morning." As they stormed out, the door slamming behind them, the diner erupted into whispers, a mix of shock and admiration rippling through the crowd. A few customers nodded in approval, their expressions softening as they watched Clara. An older woman, her hair a soft silver, slipped a $10 bill into Clara's apron as she passed. "You did the right thing, dear," she said, her voice warm with sincerity. Another patron, a burly man in a flannel shirt, clapped slowly, the sound growing as others joined in. A quiet applause that felt like a balm to Clara's frayed nerves. But Henry's reaction moved her the most. His eyes welled with tears, the deep lines on his face softening as he looked up at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That money, it's yours, hard-earned." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with a warmth she hadn't felt in months. "Everyone deserves kindness, especially those who've served our country." "How did you know I served?" Henry asked, his brows lifting in surprise. Clara's smile turned wistful as another memory surfaced. She was 15, sitting on the porch with her father after he'd returned from a long shift at the VA hospital. He'd been quiet that day, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, his eyes distant. "I met a veteran today," he'd told her, his voice low. "A man who'd lost everything, his home, his family, his hope. But he still carried himself with pride." "Clara, that's what service does. It marks you, even when the world forgets." She'd never forgotten the way her father's voice had cracked, the way he'd looked at her with a fierce determination to teach her the value of seeing the unseen. "My father was an army medic," Clara replied softly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I know the look." She handed Henry the menu, her fingers brushing against his calloused ones as she urged him to order a proper meal. "Please, it would make me happy," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Henry hesitated, then nodded, his gratitude etched into every line of his face. As he ordered a hearty plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Clara felt a small spark of triumph amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside her. But from the counter, Victor shot her a glare that could freeze fire, his jaw tight with disapproval. Clara barely noticed, her focus on Henry's small smile as he took his first bite, savoring the warmth of a meal he hadn't had in who knows how long. What she didn't see was another pair of eyes watching her, a man in a crisp suit, seated in the corner booth, his gaze sharp and calculating. Charles, as he would later introduce himself, had been there all evening, nursing a cup of black coffee and a slice of pie, his presence unobtrusive but deliberate. He scribbled notes in a small leather-bound journal, his pen moving swiftly as he observed Clara's every move. There was something about her quiet strength, her unflinching compassion, that intrigued him. He glanced at his watch, then back at Clara, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He knew something she didn't, a secret that would soon turn her world upside down. As Henry savored his meal, he folded the $20 bill Clara had given him into a tiny paper dove, a symbol of peace, he said, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered as he prepared to leave, his voice trembling with emotion. "Some angels don't need wings, they wear aprons." Clara tucked the dove into her pocket, its delicate wings brushing against her fingertips, unaware that this small act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. She watched Henry limp out into the night, his silhouette disappearing into the frosty darkness, a pang of worry tugging at her heart. Where would he go? She wondered, her mind conjuring images of him huddled in an alley, the cold seeping into his bones. Her shift ended at 4 a.m., the cold dawn biting at her skin as she stepped outside, the paper dove clutched in her hand. The city was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, but Clara's mind was anything but calm. She thought of Ethan, his frail smile after his last treatment, the way his hand had felt so small in hers as he'd whispered, "You're my hero, Clara." She whispered a quiet prayer that the dove might bring him luck, that somehow, against all odds, they'd find a way to keep fighting his illness. The weight of the night pressed down on her. Dylan's threat echoed in her mind, a dark cloud over the small victory she'd claimed. What if his father really does shut down the diner? She thought, her stomach twisting with dread. What would I do then? The next day, as Clara arrived for her evening shift, the diner buzzed with its usual rhythm. Families laughing over stacks of pancakes, truckers sipping coffee at the counter, the jukebox playing a soft country tune. But the air felt different, heavier, as Margaret pulled her aside near the kitchen, her face etched with worry. "The boss wants to see you, now," she whispered, her voice laced with concern. Clara's heart sank, a cold dread settling in her chest as she followed Margaret to the cramped back office. Victor sat behind the desk, a termination form glaring up at her from the cluttered surface, its stark white paper a harsh contrast to the faded wood. "What's this about?" Clara asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "Last night, those kids, that homeless man," Victor said coldly, his eyes narrowing as he leaned back in his chair. "You're firing me for standing up to bullies." Clara's voice cracked, disbelief and anger warring within her. "You gave away free food and threatened valued customers," Victor snapped, his tone as sharp as a blade. "I paid for that meal myself," Clara protested, her chest tightening with the injustice of it all. Her mind flashed to Ethan, the hospital bills, the treatments, the way his laughter had faded as his illness progressed. Without this job, how would she keep him alive? "Doesn't matter," Victor said, pushing the form toward her. "You embarrassed the business. Those kids' families are our best clients. Dylan's father called this morning. He's furious. Threatened to pull all his business if I didn't handle this." Clara felt as if the air had been sucked from the room, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The injustice of it all burned in her throat, not because of the job loss, but because of Ethan. She thought of the last time she'd seen him, 2 days ago, his pale face lit by the hospital's fluorescent lights. "I'm scared, Clara," he'd whispered, his voice so faint she'd had to lean in to hear him. "What if I don't make it?" She'd forced a smile, brushing his dark hair from his forehead. "You will, Ethan. I'll make sure of it." Now, that promise felt like a lie, slipping through her fingers like sand. "What about doing what's right?" "That man was a veteran," she pleaded, her voice rising with desperation. Victor's expression didn't soften, his eyes cold and unyielding. "This is a business, Clara, not a charity." Her hands shook as she signed the form, each stroke of the pen feeling like a betrayal, to Ethan, to herself, to the values her father had instilled in her. But her voice was steady as she stood, her chin lifted with a quiet defiance. "I'm not sorry for what I did, and I never will be," she said, her words a quiet rebellion against the unfairness of it all. As she walked out, a regular customer, Mrs. Larson, who always ordered cherry pie, overheard everything, her hands clutching her purse as she stood near the counter. "They're firing you for helping that veteran?" she gasped, her voice carrying through the diner, her indignation sparking whispers among the other patrons. Customers began to leave in protest, some tossing bills onto their tables with muttered curses at Victor, others shooting him dirty looks as they grabbed their coats and headed for the door. Clara gathered her things, her movements mechanical as she fought back tears, not for herself, but for Ethan. The paper dove in her pocket felt heavier now, a fragile symbol of hope in a world that seemed determined to crush it. Just then, her phone buzzed, the shrill ring cutting through the fog of her thoughts. It was the hospital. Ethan had spiked a fever and needed her immediately. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she rushed out, the cold air stinging her face as she ran toward the bus stop, the weight of the day crashing over her like a tidal wave. She didn't know how she'd pay for the next round of treatment, how she'd keep her promise to Ethan, but she knew she had to be there for him, no matter what. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, her breath visible in the frosty air, a voice called out, "Miss Bennett, a moment." She turned, her heart still racing, to see the man in the suit from the night before, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached. He held out a business card, the gold lettering catching the light of a nearby street lamp. "I think we need to talk about your future," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. He gestured to a sleek black car parked nearby, its engine humming softly. "And I've arranged a ride to the hospital. Your brother's bills? We can help with those too." Clara stared at him, confusion swirling in her mind, her fingers tightening around the card. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse with emotion. The man, Charles, smiled, a cryptic glint in his eyes. "Let's just say a friend you helped last night sent me. Someone who knows your worth, Clara, more than you might realize." Clara's mind raced, the weight of his words sinking in. A friend from last night. She thought of Henry, his tired eyes and the paper dove, but how could he be connected to this man in a suit, to a car that looked like it belonged to a CEO? The mystery deepened, a thread of suspense weaving through her fear and exhaustion. She hesitated, glancing at the card, Starlight Ventures embossed in elegant script, but the thought of Ethan propelled her forward. She nodded, stepping into the car, the leather seats cold against her skin as the driver pulled away, the city lights blurring past her window. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her courage and rewrite her story. 2 days later, Clara stood in front of a towering glass building, the headquarters of Starlight Ventures, clutching the business card Charles had given her. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, each moment etched into her memory with vivid clarity. At the hospital, Ethan's fever had miraculously broken, his doctor delivering the news with a mix of relief and confusion. An anonymous donor has covered all his medical expenses, past, present, and future, the doctor had said, his brow furrowed as he handed Clara the paperwork. I don't know who, but they insisted on complete anonymity. Clara had sat by Ethan's bedside, holding his hand as he slept, his breathing steady for the first time in weeks. See, your paper dove brought us luck, Ethan had murmured, his voice weak but hopeful, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Now, a job interview at Starlight Ventures awaited her, a company known for its chain of upscale restaurants and hotels. Dressed in her father's old suit, the cuffs slightly frayed, Clara felt out of place among the polished executives rushing past her, their briefcases swinging as they barked orders into their phones. The suit smelled faintly of her father's cologne, a comforting reminder of his strength, but the shoulders were too wide, the hem a bit too short, making her feel like an imposter in this gleaming world of glass and steel. She'd spent the morning in a nearby coffee shop, splashing cold water on her face in the bathroom, trying to steady her nerves as she pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun. What am I doing here? She thought, her reflection in the coffee shop's mirror showing a woman who looked more like a waitress than a corporate hire. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt endless, each ding amplifying her anxiety as the numbers climbed higher, 42, 43, 44, all the way to the executive suite. Her palms were sweaty, the business card creased from her nervous grip. You can't afford to turn down any opportunity, she reminded herself, her father's voice echoing in her mind. The doors opened to a reception area that screamed luxury. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the buildings glittering like jewels in the morning sun. A poised receptionist smiled as Clara approached, her heels clicking against the marble. Miss Bennett, they're waiting for you in the main conference room. Clara's heart pounded as she was led down a corridor lined with awards and photographs of elegant hotels and restaurants. She recognized several of them, including Starlight Diner, featured prominently in a collection labeled Our First Locations. The boardroom door opened, and Clara nearly stumbled, her breath catching in her throat. There, at the head of the table, sat Henry, but not the Henry she knew. Gone was the tattered jacket, replaced by a tailored suit that fit him like a second skin, his posture radiating authority. His gray hair was neatly combed, his eyes sharp and discerning, but beneath the polished exterior, Clara recognized the same quiet dignity she'd seen in the diner. "Hello, Clara," he said warmly, standing to greet her. "I owe you an explanation. I'm Henry Starlight, founder and CEO of Starlight Ventures." Clara's mind reeled, her legs feeling like they might give out as she sank into the chair he gestured to. "You own the diner?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And 50 other establishments. But that's not what matters right now." He gestured to Charles, his assistant, who stood nearby, a folder in hand. "Every year, I test my employees' character," Henry began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I disguise myself as a homeless veteran to see how they treat those who seem to have nothing to offer. Out of 42 locations I visited this year, you were the only one who stood up for me, who put your own money I know you couldn't spare, to defend a stranger's dignity." Clara sat, trying to process it all, her mind a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. Henry continued, his voice heavy with memory as he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I started with nothing, a Vietnam vet with $100 to my name. I was broken, sleeping on the streets, my nightmares so vivid I'd wake up screaming in alleys. I'll never forget the first time I was turned away from a diner, my uniform tattered, my stomach empty. A man spat at me, called me a disgrace. I felt invisible. Clara, like I'd given everything for a country that didn't care. His voice cracked, and he paused, his eyes distant as he relived the pain of those days. But then I met Ellen, a waitress at a roadside diner. She gave me free meals when I couldn't pay, listened when no one else would. She even loaned me $300 of her savings to start my first business. I never forgot her kindness. He pulled out a faded photo of Ellen from his wallet, her smile mirroring Clara's own, a beacon of hope in a grainy black and white image. I know what it's like to be invisible, Clara. When I returned from war, I was spat on, ignored. That's why I do this test, to find people who see beyond appearances, who choose compassion over convenience. Charles slid a folder across the table, his movements precise. We looked into your situation, Ethan's illness, your finances. You've sacrificed so much, he said, his tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. Clara flushed, feeling exposed, her cheeks burning as she shifted in her seat. I don't need pity, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the vulnerability she felt. Good, because I'm not offering pity, Henry replied, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. I'm offering a chance. I need someone to lead our new outreach program. Someone with heart, courage, and integrity. Someone like you. He placed another folder in front of her, the contract inside listing a salary 5 times her diner wages. Clara's breath caught in her throat, the numbers blurring as tears welled in her eyes. I don't have a degree, she protested, her voice small as she shook her head. Henry waved a hand, his expression unwavering. Degrees can be earned. Character can't. You saw a person, not a circumstance. That's what matters. Tears stung Clara's eyes as she signed, her signature shaky but resolute, overwhelmed by the turn her life had taken. She thought of Ethan, of the promise she'd made to keep him alive, and for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, a light at the end of a tunnel that had seemed endless. Henry's words echoed in her mind. You saw a person, not a circumstance. She'd done what she thought was right, never imagining it would lead her here, to a boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper, with a chance to make a difference on a scale she'd never dreamed possible. A week later, Clara stood outside Starlight Diner, her heart racing as she adjusted the small Starlight Ventures pin on her lapel. She was no longer a waitress, but the director of the Meals with Heart program, a new initiative designed to provide free meals to veterans across all Starlight locations. The past 7 days had been a blur of excitement and transformation, a new apartment in a safer neighborhood, with a sunny room for Ethan to recover in, new clothes for her first executive role, the fabric crisp against her skin, and crash courses in corporate structure and community outreach, each lesson a reminder of how far she'd come. She'd thrown herself into designing the program, working late into the night, her desk littered with notes and sketches as she drew on her own experiences and the stories she'd heard from veterans who'd passed through the diner over the years. Her proposal had impressed even the most skeptical board members, her passion shining through every word. You have a natural talent for this, Charles had said after her presentation, his usual stoicism giving way to a rare smile. Henry was right about you. Now, dressed in a tailored business suit that actually fit her, Clara felt like she was living in a dream, part of her still expecting to wake up in her old apartment, rushing to make her shift at the diner. Beside her were Henry and a group of senior managers, their presence a quiet support as they prepared to confront Victor during the lunch rush. The diner would be at its busiest, the perfect stage for what was to come. Are you nervous? Charles asked, his voice low as he adjusted his tie. Clara nodded, her fingers brushing against the paper dove in her pocket, a talisman of the journey that had brought her here. A little, she admitted, her voice soft but steady. But not about facing Victor. I'm worried about Margaret and the others. I don't want them to think I've forgotten my roots. Henry squeezed her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. That's exactly why you're perfect for this position, he said, his voice filled with pride. You never forget the people behind the success. Are you ready? Clara took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs as she nodded, her resolve hardening like steel. The diner fell silent as they entered, the familiar scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee wrapping around Clara like a comforting embrace. But the atmosphere was charged, the usual chatter replaced by a tense hush as patrons recognized Henry Starlight, the legendary owner who rarely appeared in public. Victor hurried over, his forced smile not quite reaching his eyes as he wiped his hands on his apron. "Mr. Starlight, what an honor," he exclaimed, his voice overly bright. Then he saw Clara, his expression faltering as confusion flickered across his face. "Clara, you're back?" Henry's voice boomed, carrying through the diner with an authority that demanded attention. "Not quite. Miss Bennett is now the director of our new community outreach program." Henry recounted Clara's kindness, revealing his character test to the stunned crowd, his words painting a vivid picture of the night she'd stood up for him. Customers glared at Victor, their expressions a mix of disgust and disbelief, while Margaret and the other staff smiled silently, their eyes shining with pride for Clara. "One of my restaurants just fired the wrong person," Henry said, his gaze locking onto Victor, who seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "That's unacceptable. We don't fire people for doing the right thing, but we do replace those who do the wrong thing." Charles handed Victor a letter, its contents clear even before he opened it. "You'll be transferred to our training department," Henry said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There, you'll learn our core values, starting with basic human decency. Your replacement will arrive tomorrow." Victor stood speechless, his face pale as the reality of his demotion sank in. Mrs. Larson, who'd witnessed Clara's firing, began to applaud, the sound growing as the entire diner joined in, a wave of support that washed over Clara like a warm tide. Henry raised his hand, signaling for quiet, his presence commanding the room. "There's one more announcement," he said, his voice softening as he turned to Clara. "As part of our new community initiative, Starlight Ventures will be launching the Meals with Heart program, providing free meals to veterans in need at all our restaurants. And this program will be fully designed and implemented by Miss Bennett, who showed us all what true service means." Clara stood there, unable to believe this was real, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. From a waitress worrying about medical bills, she had become the manager of a program that could help hundreds of people. Ethan, now much healthier thanks to the mysterious donor's intervention, stepped forward from the crowd, his steps tentative but his smile radiant. He wrapped his arms around Clara, his embrace tight and warm. "Dad would be so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he pressed his forehead against hers. Clara hugged him back, tears streaming down her cheeks as the diner's applause echoed around them, a symphony of support that felt like a new beginning. Henry turned to the crowd, his voice resonant as he held up the paper dove Clara had given him, its edges worn but its meaning eternal. "I built Starlight Ventures from one diner. This diner, into what it is today," he began, his eyes sweeping across the room, taking in every detail. "Over 45 years, I've learned that true success isn't about profits or prestige. It's about people who care, who choose kindness even when it's hard." Clara reminded me that the smallest acts of compassion can spark the greatest change. Kindness isn't wasted. It always comes back, often when we least expect it. Clara's journey, from a struggling waitress to a leader, shows us that courage and integrity can triumph over injustice, inspiring us all to stand up for what's right, even when the world seems determined to look the other way. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life, or been punished for doing the right thing? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how compassion has touched your life. If Clara's story moved you, don't miss out on more tales of real courage and justice. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. Hit that button before this moment of inspiration slips away. Every story we share is a chance to be uplifted, to believe in the power of kindness. Join our community today, and let's keep the hope alive together. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to bringing you life-changing narratives that remind us all of the resilience, hope, and humanity that connect us. Clara's story is a testament to the enduring power of compassion, a beacon for anyone facing a world that sometimes feels unfair. So, the next time you see someone in need, will you step in like Clara did? Sometimes, the smallest gesture can rewrite someone's story, and maybe even your own.